Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the National Door Controls NDC102EL. This is a retrofit pivot for overhead concealed closers, where what you want to do, or what you have to do, is for whatever reason the closer cannot be repaired, it cannot be replaced, it's discontinued, no longer made, or it's fine. And what you have to do is convert your opening to becoming handicap compliant. And that the closer that you have currently is certainly not permitting you to have that opening in a handicap compliant sort of arrangement. Okay. ADA, A117 was passed in maybe 1990, incredibly early 1990s, and overnight became federal law, a very large document that outlines all of the aspects of making the public areas that can become contacted by those with disabilities to render them as legally required to be handicap compliant. And that could be where this client's using these. I don't know if it's the former or the latter of the two. It could be both. Hey, this is in trouble and I'd want it to be handicap compliant anyway. There are installation instructions down below, and let's start with a visual and dimensional review of the product, and then we're going to slide into the installation instructions. We've got that document open up in front of us. Let's go through first the items that are in the package so that we have everything. We're always going to want to double check to be sure that we literally have received everything we're supposed to have before we go to the job site and try to start taking stuff down. So part number one is the conversion arm, and this is it. That's the conversion arm. They show this as part number 7 and these as part number 8. So this is why it's an end load. It's an end load because you load this from the end of the door. So I realize that's obvious, but the fact of the matter is when this is installed and you put the door down, you're going to tip it onto the spindle coming out of the overhead closer from the end of the door. Now they have side load, which would be in the face of the door, where you would tip it onto the bottom pivot, then push it in this way, and then secure it through the face of the unit here. Like if there was a big notch cut out here and then there was a bolted bracket, that would be side load. This is end load. So parts 1, 7, and 8, we know that we have. Part 2 is your 1/4 by 1.25" screws. Those are going to be used to hold the arm down into the prep in the door itself, and hopefully you can reuse the preparation that's already in the door. The holes that have been, the threads that have been created. Step 3 is part number 3 is shim for Jackson only. That would be this block here. If you've got a Jackson unit, you're going to use this bracket underneath here in order to shim you up to where you need to be. We're going to take dimensional properties of these in a moment. Bearing for Kawanier, which is the 1/16 mark. So what they're saying is I can't really tell, 11/16 diameter maybe, but it's got this little dimple that's on there. That's your mark. Kawanier. Jackson. There is no mark on this bushing. You can see that they're dimensionally different, or they appear to be different. The bearing sleeve, that's going to be part number 6. Conversion arm bracket, part number 7, we already went over that. 8 we went over. Wavy spring. Wavy spring. You're going to use this in, we'll get to it when we go through the installation instructions. There is also a bracket and a couple of bolts, and this is what's used up in the header to hold the door closer body on itself. I don't see that it's referred to anywhere in the installation instructions, but if you know, a little angle bracket like this is what's used to help keep the closer body up into the header, is what it is with these screws that are here. Now let's take some dimensional properties of everything. So we sell these pivot conversions mostly for floor closers. When you've got a floor closer and it's discontinued, you can't get them at all. We can very likely repair them, but with overhead closers, floor closers, generally with floor closers, well, generally with overhead closers as well, the closer is either directly responsible for keeping the door hanging in the frame, and if there is an auxiliary hanging method like hinges or pivots, the overhead closer or the floor closer is directly related to at least providing some form of control. So in this case, with an overhead concealed closer, you could send that to us. Literally, it's not related to this, but we repair these closers. You can take it out, send it to us, we repair it and send it back. And you might say, well, that's fine and dandy, but now my door won't stay in the frame. Okay, so if you've got a university, a bus station, an airport, a movie theater, places where doors must operate, you don't have the luxury of removing the body and sending it to us. So pivot conversions come into play, because what you're doing is you are literally abandoning the operation of that unit by simply bypassing the function of the spindle and just allowing something to turn. Okay, with a floor closer, it's a bearing that sits over the bottom spindle itself and allows everything to rotate. You're literally abandoning that in place and leaving it there. They are very much common in those applications. Same thing with the overhead material, obviously, as well. Dimensional properties. We have the arm itself, again, our part number 1. Overall length, about 6 3/4. Overall width over here, about 1.5 inches. Thickness at the top, about 5/8. Thickness over at the bottom, about 3/8. A little bit narrower, about 1.32 inches. That shim that would be required, your part number 3, if you're using a Jackson model, that's going to be just heavy on 4-inch. Overall thickness of that, about 3/8. Width, just heavy on 1 inch again. Okay, got those slotted holes. Those slotted holes, everything is slotted. What would be really nice is if they had a fixed hole and 2 slotted holes, where you could bring your screws and tip your door so that it is plumb, basically, through the slotted holes. Make sure that that works, and then run one through a single solid hole. That would be better, but that's not how this is. The screw we talked about, those are they have those as 1.25 inches, quarter 20, 1.25 inches. They're thread forming screws that are here. It's not even. Yeah, it's 1 inch. Thread forming screws at the tip of there, very typical. Your bearing for Jackson with the ID mark. Outside diameter of 0.932, 0.932 outside. Thickness of that, 0.249. Width across the flats, 0.535 wide. Continuing with our Jackson item. Outside diameter, 0.932. A thickness, 0.249. Width across the flats on this one, 0.573. Okay, bearing sleeve, outside diameter, 1.059. Thickness, 0.247. Inside diameter, 0.939. Okay, that would make sense. Those other ones were 0.92, I believe. Your wavy washer. Now we'll get to that note when we look at the installation instructions. That's going to have a thickness of about, about 3/16 of an inch, that sort of business. And we'll go over that in a moment. Now let's continue on with the installation instructions, going step by step. Okay, now looking at step number 1, we're going to remove the door. Okay, that's good step 1. Remove existing overhead concealed closer arm from the top rail of the door. When you get the door down, there's going to be an arm up there. You're going to carefully remove that. Maybe reuse the screws, maybe don't, whatever the case is. Install the NDC conversion arm, your item 1, which as we know is going to be, this end here. You've got items 7 and 8. They're showing it with this removed. Using the existing hole pattern, if possible. If necessary, drill 2 7/32 of an inch holes and attach the arm. 2 self-tapping 1/4 by 1.25 screws, which are item 2, these are really 1 inch, are provided to attach the arm. If existing Jackson closer is Jackson 101, spacer, which is number 3, which is part number 3, what we talked about, must be placed under the arm before you get that installed. The shame about that is each of those pieces were about 3/8. Well, that's 3/4 inch. So you're going to need longer screws, in my opinion. That's not going to be enough. So if these were truly 1.25 inch, you'd be in good shape. But be mindful, get yourself some 1.25 quarter 20s for sure. They're all, I've got other sets here. This client ordered 3 sets. They're all too short. Step 4, install bearing item 4 or 6. See note below. It's really 4 or 5. And that note below tells you the Kewanee or Husky closure shaft is 17/32 square, and the Jackson 101 closure shaft is 9/16. That's why both of those are a bit different. It is important to place the correct bearing on the appropriate closer. The difference in the bearing is shown in the description box at left. One's marked and the other is not. So install bearing item 4 or 6 in the instructions. It's really 4 or 5. And the bearing sleeve, which is indeed item 6. Okay. On the overhead concealed closer shaft, a small amount of grease applied to the ID of the bearing and bearing sleeve will help hold parts in position during installation. Obviously long-term use as well, coating the material. I don't know what grease that they use, but white lithium seems to be something that's relatively common. I would probably use a moderate amount of that. Rehang the door. Your arm's going to be up there loose. You don't have 7 and 8 installed. This is attached to the door. You've got your parts attached to your shaft. That is going to have to be installed. You've got the bearing and the sleeve attached to your spindle coming out of the closer. You've got your arm attached to the door, so you're going to tip that down onto the bottom pivot and then bring it in to basically bring it all like this. Okay, like that. And this will all mate together, and then you'll bring items 7 and 8 in together and then tighten all that down, is what that's really going to look like. Attach conversion arm bracket, item 7 to conversion arm with the 2 10/24 screws, item 8. So basically the door is precariously in place. Someone's holding that obviously at 90 degrees while you're bringing part 7 and the 2 bolts to tighten it together. Tighten those uniformly. Don't do one tight all the way than the other. This is going to crimp ever so slightly, so just do it equally. Check to make sure the door swings freely. Note, if door does not swing freely, bottom of the door may need to be, I don't know what the word is, to be, I have the document. The word is shimmed. The bottom of the door may need to be shimmed. You might have to do some work on it if the bottom pivot is not, if the bottom pivot is not healthy as well, it might need to be replaced. If door was originally double acting, install stop on the frame. Refer to stop instructions on back of this sheet. So this funny little bracket that can be used to hold your closer body in is actually the stop. And the point of the matter is, if you have, this is center hung, the vertical axis of pivoting is going down through the center of the thickness of the door. And if your closer was originally double acting, you're very likely going to need to run this stop into your header to prevent the door from swinging back in the opposite direction when you are adding that surface-mounted door closer. Now, many decades ago, 1930s, earlier as well, people like Rixson and Corbin, they actually made surface-mounted door closers that double-acted. A really cool thing. I think it was the Rixson 44 that did it. And that certainly existed in the 1940s, I know that. And it was a surface-mounted closer that double-acted. You had to have double-acting spring hinges, or, well, you had to have double-acting hinges, but it was a double-acting closer. They don't make those anymore. There is no double-acting surface-mounted closer that exists today that I'm aware of. I've not seen it manufactured in the last several decades. Install surface-mounted closer according to the installation instructions. Packaged with the closer. That stop, about 3 13/16 by 9/16 by about 5/8 or so. Okay. Interestingly, though, they give us only flathead screws for that, so you might want to come with some roundhead screws. Actually, yeah, as I had suspected, these are 1.25 inches, this flathead, okay, but it's really not going to be quite 1.25 inches being a flathead, so you're still not going to have a ton of threads, maybe 3 threads if you use that flathead screw. If it was me, I would definitely be using roundhead or panhead screws with washers longer. You can use these short ones for your stop if necessary, if you're adding that stop. Regulate the door closer according to the installation instructions from the closer. Then that note, which we've already read. Caution, this pivot is designed for retrofit. You may encounter unusual field conditions that affect the installation or operation of the NDC pivot. Sure, if the door is not plumb, if the door is warped, if the frame is cracked, if the internal components of the door don't work to begin with, you can't really take a, the last time I looked at a floor closer where a client wanted to replace it, but couldn't do a direct replacement because it hadn't been made in decades. The door itself, every time they opened the door, there was a creaking sound. And the problem with that is that the door itself was damaged, cracked on the bottom. And these were 3080 or maybe 308'4", something in that range. Pair matched African mahogany, something like that. Exterior. And what I believe they did was literally took stock doors. They weren't stock, but they did not have large rails made for the hardware. And they just trimmed and mortised that big bottom arm of a floor closer into that bottom of the door. And it lasted for 5 or 10 years until all that wood in the bottom just gave way. The adhesive broke down. Nothing's staying together anymore. The point of the matter is adding a national door pivot conversion to that is not going to fix the problem. Okay, the closer didn't work, but the door still cracked, is the bottom line. Now that wavy spring has been included with the NDC102 end load for doors that are lower or slightly out of plumb. Placing the wavy spring on the spindle first will keep the bearing from coming back, the bearing and the hub that will be inside of your arm from working its way back up the spindle. Okay, it's like a hinge pin. As you open and close the door a million times, well, what, a million or whatever it is, that pin tends to work its way up. It's like it's being extruded out. Well, the same thing's going to happen with that bearing. So use the wavy washer if there's any slop there at all, if there's any play. You want to have that in place. Finally, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the National Door Controls products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the NDC102 EL end load, pivot conversion arm, or any other National Door Control product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.